Quassim, thank you so much for joining me today. I have to say, I love a conspiracy theory myself. First question, I don't think they are, but I want you to explain to me, are they a new phenomenon?
Not at all. Conspiracy theories, in some sense, I think have been around for as long as politics has been around. The conspiracy theories that we talk about today are somewhat different, I think, from older conspiracy theories, but the basic genre is a very old one.
And can you explain to me what is a conspiracy theory?
Well, the simplest definition is that it's any attempt to explain a significant happening by blaming it on the actions of a group of people, a small group of people acting together in secret. So that's the most straightforward explanation. Now, if you define a conspiracy theory that way, then of course history is full of them.
Yeah. So effectively, there is a conspiracy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can talk about a conspiracy as an idea. So, or there are genuine conspiracies, but then there are things called conspiracy theories. And, in the book, which I really enjoyed, I have to say, I read it from cover to cover very quickly and then had another go at reading it because, as a layman, one doesn't always get everything on the first attempt. But, a theory about a conspiracy is one thing, but you talk about a conspiracy theory with a small c and a small t, which I believe is a theory about a conspiracy. But you
Correct.
also speak about a big C and a big T, a conspiracy theory. Explain to me the difference between the two.
So here's a kind of test for your listeners. So if you think about 9/11, so after 9/11, there was a government commission called the 9/11 Commission, which was tasked with finding out what happened. So the basic story that the 9/11 Commission came up with was that 9/11 was the result of a small group of Al-Qaeda operatives acting together in secret, in other words, a conspiracy, to carry out the attack. So that was the official account. So that's a theory about a conspiracy. Then, of course, there's the alternative account, which says that 9/11 was an inside job somehow, that the Bush administration was somehow behind it. Now, both of these are theories about conspiracies. They both explain what 9/11 was by reference to conspiracy. But I think most people, even whether you're a conspiracy theorist or not, I think most people would think it's strange to call the official report of the 9/11 Commission a conspiracy theory, right? And one reason I think that it seems odd to call it that is that usually when people talk about conspiracy theories, they mean theories that are opposed to the official view, theories that go against received opinion. And so the reason you can't call the report of the 9/11 Commission a conspiracy theory is that it wasn't against the official view, it was the official view. Right. So when we talk about conspiracy theories with a big C and a big T, we aren't just talking about any old explanation of any old conspiracy. Because there are lots of explanations like that. History books are full of them. So Guy Fawkes, right?
Yeah.
That if you say, well, Guy Fawkes conspired with his mates to blow up Parliament, that's a historically well-supported theory about a conspiracy. But if you're a historian who writes about the gunpowder plot, I don't think many people would say, oh, well, you're just a conspiracy theorist. Right. So that shows that when we talk about conspiracy theories in the sense in which people do nowadays, these controversial theories about, 9/11 and JFK and Sandy Hook and whatever, they're not just talking about, theories about conspiracies. They're talking about something more specific and more limited. And part of what makes these theories distinctive is that, as I say, they are contrary to the official view. There are other features as well, but that's a crucial feature.
And to this layman again, can you just explain to me the difference between misinformation and disinformation?
So misinformation is just information that's incorrect, right? So if you say to me, what's the capital of California? And I genuinely believe that the capital of California is San Francisco. So I say to you, San Francisco is the capital of California. Okay, well, that's a piece of misinformation. Right, because it isn't the capital of California. So that's misinformation, but it may be completely sincere on my part. I might have the sincere belief. Disinformation is basically misinformation that's dressed to look as if it's actual genuine information. So disinformation is where I give you false information, but I do so in a way that makes it look as if it's the real thing. So so with disinformation, there's an attempt to deceive, whereas misinformation per se may or may not involve deception.
But therein is a let off for some of our CTers out there, because they may well be, if we look at, when we will look at what the typical CT person is like, is they're often ill-educated, so they could well be misinformed, couldn't they?
They could indeed, and I'm sure that there is a lot of genuine belief in conspiracy theories based on misinformation, where it's completely sincere. But I like to think that when we talk about conspiracy theories and what people do or don't believe, I think it's actually also quite helpful to distinguish between producers and consumers. So there are people who come up with these theories, and so you can ask about what they believe and what their motives are and what they're up to. And then there are the consumers, people who believe these theories, or even if they don't believe them, are interested in them, or might circulate them or retweet them or whatever. And the story you tell about the consumers, I think, needs to be different from the story that you tell about the producers. And I think it's very easy to see the distinction when you look at some currently popular conspiracy theories.
Talking about producers and consumers, can you be a producer and a consumer?
You can. I mean, well, you can be, in the sense that, of course, you can be a producer of a conspiracy theory that you yourself believe in, right? So that's entirely possible. But if you think about the Sandy Hook conspiracy theory, so just to remind people of what they are, what that is. So Sandy Hook was back in 2012 when a guy called Adam Lanza went to an elementary school in Connecticut, in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, and he shot dead 20 children at the elementary school, along with 6 teachers, right? So an absolute massacre. So within a short period of time, the conspiracy theory started to circulate. Well, there are two. One was the shootings never happened. The whole thing was a false flag operation. And the other was that it did happen, but it was all a setup by the Obama administration, which was doing it in order to promote the case for greater gun control. Now, you have to ask yourself the question, what were the people who were promoting this theory, who came up with these theories? What were they thinking? Did they actually believe these theories? And what was their agenda? What were they trying to achieve by promoting these theories? So, I mean, my own view is that at least some of the people who put these theories forward actually didn't believe them. And one famous guy who put the theory forward was a guy called Alex Jones in the US. And when he was taken to court about this, he said, "Oh, well, I didn't really mean it. I was suffering from some psychosis, and that's why I said these things." But nevertheless, he promoted the theory.
But isn't Alex Jones one of those people that also makes money from conspiracy theory?
Well, exactly. So I think that's a key point. That promotion of conspiracy theories is big business. There is money to be made. If you go to Alex Jones's Infowar website, you'll see that there's a whole lot of merchandise that you can buy there, merchandising that's related to conspiracies, right? So, survival gear of one sort or another, and of course, lots of I think stuff to do with guns. And the other thing, of course, about people like Alex Jones is that they are passionately opposed to greater gun control in the States. Now, if you are an opponent of gun control in the States and something like Sandy Hook happens, your big concern, I mean, well, you should be concerned about the kids who were killed. But apart from that, another concern you might have is, isn't this going to strengthen the case for gun control? Right. Now, if you want to deflect the case for gun control, then actually saying it never happened or it was a false flag is actually quite an effective way of promoting your political objective. Right. So that's the idea, that the producers have a whole lot of incentives for promoting these theories, which have nothing at all to do with whether they believe these theories or not.
And are they often tailored to confirm the bias that certain people already have?
That's absolutely right. So as people will know, I mean, the whole issue of gun control in the US is unbelievably toxic and contentious. And there are people there who are, violently and passionately opposed to gun control, and theories that kind of plug into that opposition are obviously going to be attractive and seductive to people with that mindset.
It's easier to justify your ownership if you can just say, Sandy Hook never happened, did it?
Yeah, I mean, just think of just how appalling Sandy Hook was. I mean, just imagine, 20 kids.
You're a parent. Just think about being a parent there and saying and having it out there broadly broadcast on the internet that and totally believed by many because they're the people that are just misinformed. They're not disinformators. They're just misinformed. That their children never died.
Well, it's dreadful. It's dreadful. And in fact, interestingly, some of the Sandy Hook parents took some of the more notorious conspiracy theories to court, the charge was a charge of defamation. And so one of the most notorious proponents of these theories was actually a philosopher called James Fetzer, who wrote a book called Sandy Hook Never Happened or something like that. So Fetzer was taken to court by a Sandy Hook parent, and the jury awarded $450,000 of damages against Fetzer in favor of the parent for defamation and distress caused by the theory. And actually, that can be a highly effective way of dealing with these guys. I mean, if your kid is shot dead, at school, I mean, it's about the most appalling thing imaginable for anybody. And some guy is out there on the radio saying it never happened, that these were crisis actors, nobody died at Sandy Hook. I mean, that's just appalling.
And we know, because we do believe in education and we do believe in experts, that it did happen. Right, it's an irrefutable fact that it did happen. We'll come on to trying to destroy experts later. Just give me though, what is the recipe for a perfect CT?
So I think what conspiracy theories try to do is that they try to offer an explanation of something that seems otherwise particularly shocking or hard to understand. So first of all, you pick an event like that. So the Kennedy assassination, the death of Princess Diana, or whatever. Then you find some anomalies or something that seems not to quite fit in the official account. And then you say there were powerful people, a small group of powerful people acting behind the scenes who were responsible for this. So in the case of Princess Diana, of course, people know that there's a conspiracy theory that it was the Duke of Edinburgh who ordered her assassination. So that's one of these ludicrous theories that's out there. And to me, and I guess hopefully to you as well, I mean, this seems absolutely absurd, but there are people to this day who don't believe that she was, killed in a car crash as a result of drunk driving. That there had to be more to it. So they plug into this idea.
People don't, and I think it's nonsense, toxic nonsense. But people often use them because they just don't like the sad fact, the awful fact.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the Diana case is a very good example of that. That somehow they offer, in a strange way, these theories offer people comfort. Something as sad as the death of Princess Diana at such a young age. I mean, such a horrible thing to have happened and a terrible waste. And I think one thing that human beings try to do is that we try to make sense of the world. We try to find a deeper meaning in events. This is a really fundamental part of human nature. And in a case like that, saying that actually it wasn't just an accident, someone was behind it, enables people who believe these theories to find some sort of deeper significance in what happened. Because if you believe that what happened was that she simply died in a car crash, then of course, there is no deeper significance. It's just a terrible tragedy and a terrible waste. But there's nothing more to it than that. And it's this feeling that people have that there must be more to it than that. This can't be all there is. I think that's one of the things that drives people, at least some people, to look for these kind of deeper, hidden explanations in terms of these dark forces working behind the scenes to make things happen.
So the main recipe, you would say, is to play on sometimes people's emotions,
play
on people's maybe their ignorance and their vulnerability, and also to reaffirm their bias.
Yeah, and so reaffirm their bias and plug into prejudices that people already have.
Well, that leads me very nicely onto my next question, which is mentioned numerous times in the book. That do all CTs have a basis in anti-Semitism, and can you explain to me that from that, or using this as the base to explain why that possibly is the case, the protocols of the Elders of Zion?
Yeah. So let's start off with a kind of historical point. So one of the most influential conspiracy theories of all time, certainly in the 20th century, was this theory called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. So the Protocols is a forgery, which was allegedly the report of a meeting of Jewish elders who were hatching a plot for world domination.
Early 1900s, yeah.
Early 19, so 1905. Now, the historical evidence suggests that the person who came up with this was a member of the Russian secret police. This was, of course, pre-communist times, the Tsarist era. However, although this was, clearly absurd and a clear forgery, the protocols were taken up in the early part of the 20th century and promoted as historical fact. And one of the biggest promoters of the protocols was Hitler in Mein Kampf. So Hitler and the Nazis actually taught the protocols. They insisted that the protocols were taught in German schools in history lessons as real history. And there's quite a lot of historical evidence showing that what impact the protocols had on anti-Semitic pogroms in the first half of the 20th century, and of course, ultimately, you have the Holocaust. So the protocols really set up this idea, which is still around today, of powerful. So nowadays, sometimes people talk about Jews, but other times people use code like globalists or financiers or wealthy bankers, and so there's this kind of trope of these powerful people who are supposedly identifiable as Jews, who are responsible for these plots to dominate the world. Now, it's not true, of course, that all conspiracy theories are anti-Semitic. I mean, there are conspiracy theories that have nothing to do with that. But what I think is true is that conspiracy theories are operating in a tradition that was originally shaped by the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, and where a lot of the sort of motifs and tropes that were used in the protocols, wealthy Jewish people working in secret, pulling the strings, these are still around today in a lot of conspiracy theories. It's not something that's just a kind of historical curiosity. These theories are alive and well. So that's the thing I really want. This isn't a point that's original to me. It's been made by other people. So what one of the things I want to do when I talk about conspiracy theories to people who think, oh well, it's just a bit of fun, is to say to them, well, hold on a second. Let's be clear what you are flirting with here. Let's be clear what the historical tradition is within which these theories fall. And if you start Googling conspiracy theories or look for them on YouTube, you're never more than a few clicks away from something really odious. It could be anti-Semitic or racist or obnoxious, in some other way.
So do you believe that all CTs have some form of political agenda?
I think that the vast majority of CTs have a political agenda. I mean, so the political agenda of 9/11 conspiracy theories was, hostility to the Bush administration and its policy in Iraq. So that was that case. Conspiracy theories about vaccinations are very much tied up with hostility, suspicion, and hostility towards big pharma and political elites. That's still politics. The moon landings, people say, well, what about the moon landings? That's not political. Well, yeah, but I mean, if you really think the moon landings were a conspiracy, you have to ask yourself the question, okay, so who are the conspirators? And well, it's the deep state. It's the big government. It's the deep state. So that's politics, right? So if you're looking for conspiracy theories that have kind of no politics at all, people say, well, what about the disappearance of Elvis? Elvis faked his own disappearance. Well, what I want to say to that is that's not a conspiracy, right? If Elvis faked his own disappearance, then that's just one person, right? So you can't have a conspiracy of one. But maybe there are these sort of marginal, these marginal cases where, there really isn't a political angle. But the interesting conspiracy theories, the significant, the influential conspiracy theories, all the ones we've talked about today, they all have a political angle, a political agenda.
Lighten it for a second, if we can, Quassim. Give us the most bizarre. Give us 5 of the most bizarrest, weirdest ones you've ever heard, or 3 or 4, please.
Well, I mean, look, QAnon, right? For my money, QAnon is one of the most bizarre theories. So QAnon is a theory that senior Democrats and other members of the political elite in America are running a pedophile child sex ring from the basement of a pizza restaurant in Washington called Comet Ping Pong. What they're doing is that they're harvesting the blood of kids to drink. And there's a guy called Q, high up in the U.S. government, who is revealing that none other than our great hero Donald J. Trump was working behind the scenes to expose this terrible pedophile conspiracy, right? So that to me is about as ludicrous as a conspiracy theory as I can imagine.
But again, it had a serious side, because I didn't an armed man turn up at that pizza restaurant that doesn't have a basement, by the way. And probably doesn't have senior Democrats in it drinking the blood of children. But he turned up with a gun, did he?
Yeah. So I mean, that's a good illustration of how, even the most absurd theory can have terrible consequences. So some guy actually believed this theory and turned up at Comet Ping Pong demanding to see the basement. Then we discovered that there was no basement. I think he fired a shot in the restaurant which didn't hit anyone, and he was arrested and sent to jail for 3 years. But of course, people can die as a result of conspiracy theories.
Oh, we're going to come to that, because lots of people have died because of conspiracy.
Lots of people die. Yeah. I actually think that the 5G is responsible for spreading coronavirus. That seems pretty bizarre to me. I mean, I don't know how that's supposed to work.
I've got one. Bill Gates is microchipping the vaccine.
Yes, that's another one. I mean, the most incredible thing about these latest examples, the last 2 examples, is that these are theories that are actually current. There are people out there who believe them strongly enough to go around setting fire to 5G masts, right? So,
but again, let's come on to the serious side of it. And as again, one thing that kept me up last night, and I've been listening and hearing this on the news over the last couple of days, that there are members of the BAME community in the UK that are very wary about taking the COVID vaccine, and that mistrust is based on historical mistrust of government. And then I read in the book that most people who believe or have a bigger acceptance of CTs are people who have been victims of real, actual conspiracies. And I'd like you to explain to me and to the people listening about Tuskegee. That's the right way to say it.
Yeah, Tuskegee or Tuskegee. So one finding in research in the States is that African Americans are more likely to believe conspiracy theories than white Americans. At least this was the case up to 5 or 10 years ago. So an obvious question is, well, why should that be? Well, now if you look at the African American history in the U.S. and the whole history of slavery, for example, it's not entirely surprising that African Americans, are suspicious of so-called established authorities. And an incredible example of this was the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. So this was a study carried out by the Department of Health in the U.S. of what happens when people suffer from untreated syphilis. And this was at a time when there was no treatment for syphilis. This is when it started.
It was in the late 20s.
The late 20s, yeah. So they recruited something like 600 African-American sharecroppers. I mean, very dirt poor African-American, poor farmers who had syphilis. And they basically observed the progress of the disease. Now, during the course of this study, penicillin was discovered and as a treatment for syphilis, and was starting to be used as a treatment for syphilis. Now, what happened is that instead of actually just giving these people antibiotics for their syphilis, they just didn't do it. So they were able to continue the study, not treating these people.
So these people would have passed on the syphilis. They would have gone blind. They would have endured horrible pain. And how long did this study, so-called study, go on for?
It went on until I think the 1990s, as far as I can remember.
So they kept this ongoing through generations.
Yeah, it went on for a long time, and eventually it came to light not as the result of a conspiracy theorist, but as the result of a whistleblower. And if I can't remember the exact date, but there was some point, many decades into the experiment, when a whistleblower revealed that the Department of Health and its representatives had knowingly and consciously not given these people the treatments that were available to them. And in the 1990s, eventually there was a ceremony in the White House at which Bill Clinton apologized on behalf of the American government to the Tuskegee survivors. Now, you have to think about, the popularity of in the African American community of the theory that AIDS was invented by the CIA as a way of exterminating the black population of the US. Now, I mean, if you don't know anything about Tuskegee, you would think, how ridiculous. But if you do know about Tuskegee, it doesn't seem quite so ridiculous anymore. I mean, so it's of course, I'm not saying that that theory is correct. All I'm saying is that, you have to look at people's willingness to believe conspiracy theories in the light of their sort of broader perspective on how trustworthy the government is. And sometimes people don't trust the government for good historical reasons.
Well, governments, as we know, are guilty of spreading misinformation and CTs, right?
Well, that's right. And I mean, if you look at the popularity of 9/11 conspiracy theories, which I, of course, I don't myself believe, but I can see that these theories were attractive to people who were very cross about what they saw as disinformation about WMD in Iraq, right? So, and of course, I mean, the Bush administration itself was promoting the theory that Iraq was working together with Al Qaeda, which in fact it wasn't, right? So, so you can see that people who were very suspicious of the Bush administration and of the record of the American government over the years, might be more inclined to believe that they were capable of pulling off a stunt like, doing 9/11 itself. I don't believe that for 1 minute, but it might explain why some people do believe it.
Well, apparently a third of Americans. Is that right?
Well, a lot of Americans. I mean, there'd be different surveys at different times, but certainly in 6 or 7 years after 9/11, a vast number of Americans believed that 9/11 was an inside job, or that in any case that the official account was in one way or another inaccurate. And people are still incredibly worked up about this. It's 20 years down the line, but actually, if even now, if you go online and say that you actually believe the official account of 9/11, you better be prepared for a whole heap of abuse, because people still get very, very cross about that.
And that's another. I mean, I want to come on to just one more thing, going back to so there was a big mistrust of antiretrovirals in the US, particularly amongst the black community there. And Mbeki, who was in charge of South Africa,
yeah,
he honestly believed that it was a plot, didn't he?
Yeah. So Thabo Mbeki was the president of South Africa. And he was a kind of AIDS denialist, and he thought that the whole idea of HIV causing AIDS and being treatable by these antiretroviral drugs, that the whole thing was disinformation, and he actually, didn't provide funding. The South African government didn't provide funding for antiretroviral drugs to the population of South Africa, which actually had AIDS. And there have been various calculations about the number of excess deaths in South Africa as a result of this. But you're looking into the tens of thousands of people who needn't have died and wouldn't have died if they'd been given drugs at the appropriate time. And they would have been given drugs at the appropriate time if the president of South Africa hadn't believed this effectively conspiracy theory.
So, had there been experts, and had the experts been allowed to speak, hopefully that might have changed public opinion. Now, in the book, you talk about the death of the expert.
Yes. So many of your listeners will remember during the Brexit campaign something that Michael Gove said, which was that the people of this country have had enough of experts. Now, to be completely fair to Gove, I think what Gove was talking about was specifically economists. I mean, what he was talking about was what he saw as the failure of economists to forecast what was going to happen with the economy. And I think, as far as that is concerned, he possibly had a point, but it was seen as a kind of broader attack on expertise. So the idea that there's that the people of this country no longer were interested in the views of experts of any sort on any topic, and this in turn was interpreted as part of a kind of broader political trend, which was mistrust of people in power, mistrust of people in authority. And of course, if you look to people, so-called experts to decide on the truth or falsity of a conspiracy theory, if you are mistrustful of experts, you're also going to be mistrustful of experts who tell you that your conspiracy theory is no good. I mean, it's worth pointing out that actually this whole business of expertise, when you look at it today, I mean, those of us who kind of watch the news on tenterhooks every night to hear the experts tell us what the latest is with COVID-19. I think most people actually do listen to the experts on that subject, but there are some who don't. So there are some people who go around to this day saying that what the government's so-called experts are telling us about coronavirus is false. Or exaggerated in some way. So that would be an example of this sort of anti-expert sentiment, which is undoubtedly there in some sections of the population. Though I don't think, certainly in Britain, I see no evidence that most British people are anti-expert. I don't believe that for a second.
But again, the thing for me is that conspiracies do happen. We wouldn't have the word conspiracy. They're as old as time. Yeah. You've got to look, go back to ancient Greece, recordings, Rome, Egypt, ancient societies. Conspiracies are not a new thing, and they will continue, whether they're done through big business, whether they're done through governments, whether they're done by just individuals on their own with the same political agenda. The point is, how much impact do CTs have if they come from members of the public? And how much impact do they have if they do come from big business? They come from the top end, from governments. Do they have a different effect, or can they have a similar effect?
I think that historically they haven't had the same effect. Things might be changing. So let me give you an example. So after 9/11, of course, the American government was very interested in the role of Iraq in 9/11. What they knew from their intelligence community was that, in fact, it was Al-Qaeda that was responsible for 9/11. But particularly the Vice President, Dick Cheney, was very exercised by trying to find a link between Iraq and Al-Qaeda. And so they started to Cheney started to put about the implication that, in fact, there was a connection, and they talked about some meeting that supposedly took place in Prague between the lead 9/11 hijacker and a member of Iraqi intelligence services. Now, of course, it didn't happen, and ultimately, Cheney himself, I think, agreed that there was no Al-Qaeda Iraq link. But the idea of such a link was already out there. There was the idea that there was a link had been sort of promoted by Cheney and others, to the extent that by the time that the Americans invaded Iraq in 2003, surveys showed that the majority of Americans believed that there was a link between Al Qaeda and Iraq. And by the time it was all shown not to be true, it had already done its work. Now, you were asking about, well, comparing the influence of government conspiracy theories with conspiracy theories that come from the bottom up. So I've given you an example of a very effective conspiracy theory promoted by the American government. But in the sort of internet age, and with social media being as it is, I think there is more scope now of conspiracy theories coming from members of the public and starting to circulate in that way. So if you think about particularly coronavirus is caused by 5G, but that's a theory that's around, that I think is a theory that's come from members of the public, and it certainly had some influence. So I think that what social media has done is it has created ways for members of the public to promote and distribute these theories that wouldn't have been possible pre-social media.
I'm going to misquote this, but in the book it says one of the biggest challenges we face is to help our children navigate the internet with discernment. I mean, great statement. How do you implement that?
Yeah. Oh goodness, that is such a difficult job. I mean, one thing you need to do is to get your children, I think, to think about the difference between a source you can trust and a source that you can't trust. Now, if you say, well, okay, but how do you tell the difference between a source you can trust and a source that you can't trust? So I would say, look, take a simple example, like you have a medical condition, right? And you're worried about your medical condition, so you Google it. Okay, so one of the top search things that comes up is the NHS website, right? Or maybe the Mayo Clinic in the US, and that tells you what it is, right? And then you'll find lots of other other organizations or individuals who you can't identify, who tell you something completely different, right, about the nature of your illness. So the one thing is to say, well, look, which of these should you be trusting and which of these should you not be trusting, and why one and not the other? So if I say, as I would say, that look, you should trust the NHS website, but you shouldn't be trusting this random website that you've just found online. Well, why is that? Why should you trust the NHS website? Well, then you'd have to say, well, okay, because if you look at the sort of incentive structures on the NHS website, the NHS has a huge incentive as an institution to put out their accurate information to the best of its knowledge, right? It has no interest and no incentive to lie or misrepresent the medical facts. Now, this other website that says quite the opposite. So here's why you shouldn't trust that. You shouldn't trust that website. Well, number one, you don't know who these people even are. You don't know what their qualifications are. You know nothing about it, right? So don't trust it, because there's no good reason to trust that website, but there is good reason to trust the NHS website. So you then multiply this procedure, and you get kids to learn that there's lots and lots of stuff out there on the internet. Probably more of it is false than is true. And you have to learn how to tell the difference by learning the difference between sources you should be trusting and sources that you shouldn't be trusting, and then explaining how that works out using practical examples, right? So why should you trust the New York Times but not InfoWars? Okay, well, again, there's I think a perfectly straightforward story to be told about why, basically, if you want news about what's going on in the States, you're much better off trusting the New York Times than trusting InfoWars, and so on and so forth. So that's a kind of technique, I think, that kids need to learn.
Well, I want to ask you this question, because I'm not going to point a finger, but I think you'll know where I'm going. What do we do when governments use CTs with a big C and a big T to promote their own agenda and punish others that don't agree with them?
Yeah. So this is such a serious thing. I mean, it's obviously what what we're talking about here is Trump and his supporters using conspiracy theory CTs to incite eventually an attempt to overthrow the outcome of a democratic election in the US. I mean, a monumentally important thing that happened.
You don't really, apart from the death, the hundreds of thousands of deaths, you don't get more important than destroying democracy, really, do you?
Yeah. So this was a really big deal, and of course, what happened in the end was that Twitter permanently barred Trump from Twitter, which was his main means of communicating with the world. I mean, I think what I said when that happened was, what took them so long? I mean, Twitter has its rules about the use of the medium, and it does actually chuck people off Twitter or suspend them for it seems to me much much more trivial infractions than the one that Trump was responsible for over a long period of time. But then you get the other side of the coin, which is people saying, yeah, but look, why should the chief executives of these large tech companies be the people to decide, who has a voice and who doesn't have a voice? And that's a legitimate question. That's a legitimate question, and there is an answer to that question, I think, which is that if you think about people who publish books, book publishers are responsible for the content of the books, right? So if the books are libelous, they are responsible for that. And publishers have very good reason not to publish stuff that is libelous, because there is legal blowback. The idea on the internet that anybody can say anything they like using one of these platforms, and the platforms are not responsible, that is really the cause of the problem. I mean, I mean, this isn't something that I think is very practical, but if you said to Twitter and Facebook, you companies are now responsible for the content on your website, just in the way that publishers are responsible for the stuff that they publish, of course, then things would be completely and utterly different. And free speech does not mean that you have the right to go around libeling people. It does not mean that you can shout fire in a crowded cinema, right? It does not mean that you can go around racially abusing people on the street. So there are all sorts of limitations on free speech that are perfectly consistent with a democratic society. And people have somehow got it into their heads that just because it's social media, people should be allowed, or should be allowed to just say anything they like without anybody doing anything about it. I don't see why that's true at all.
So you believe it can be monitored. But going back to, how do you, when your government is actively putting out conspiracy theories for its own agenda, and in order to admonish or punish opposing entities, how do you tackle that?
Well, vote them out. Do what the Americans did. I mean,
but is that your only recourse?
Well, I mean, of course you can. There's recourse in the sense that there are newspaper journalists who can publish investigative stories about this.
But they were faking it. They were fake newsers, weren't they?
Yes. Well, of course, there's no knockdown. There's no knockdown argument. But I mean, if you think about the defenses that we have against this sort of bad behavior on the part of governments, you rely on the opposition. You rely on the opposition to ask the difficult questions. So this is why you need an opposition in a democracy. This is a crucial role for them. This is why you need a free press, and this is why you need elections. You need all of those. Those are the main weapons that you have against the bad behavior of governments. And all we can do is to hope that these weapons are used when the time comes.
So right at the very end of the book, you talk about the ways that conspiracy theorists and their theories can be dealt with. You say to just ignore is the wrong thing to do. They're not going to go away. You have to face them, particularly if you're an expert. So you say rebuttal, education, and outing. Can you just tell me or explain to me those processes?
Okay, so rebuttal means trying to refute the theories by providing evidence the other way. Now, the thing about rebuttal is that although it's important that conspiracy theories are rebutted, it's naive to expect these rebuttals to actually convince the committed conspiracy theorists, right? So rebuttal is much more effective when it comes to people who are, as I like to call them, conspiracy curious. So people who are not already true believers, where rebutting the theory might be effective in stopping them from fully endorsing the theory. But that's got to be so if somebody says the Holocaust never happened, it's really, really important that there are top historians who can provide you with documentary proof that it happened, right? So that's the rebuttal element. Education is the thing that we were talking about earlier, which is educating our children to distinguish between trustworthy and untrustworthy sources, and getting them away from the idea that you can't trust anyone, or that everyone lies, or that they're all the same. It's really important that people don't get seduced by that idea. And in practice, I think we aren't seduced by that idea. I mean, I would be willing to take a bet that the vast majority of people listening to this program, when they're unwell and have concerns about their health, will in fact rely on the NHS, right? I mean, actually, that's what they will do, and they'll rely on the NHS because they believe, with good reason, that the NHS is an excellent option for them in the event of ill health. So you need to kind of remind people that there is a difference between good and bad. There is a difference between reliable and unreliable, trustworthy and untrustworthy information and misinformation, and educate them to distinguish between them. The third thing, outing, is I think maybe the most controversial thing, which is to say to people, you need to learn a bit more about what conspiracy theories are, what they have been used for in the past, and what the agendas are of the people who promote these theories. Don't think that we're dealing here with something that's just a bit of fun or harmless or innocent. So outing means actually, revealing to people who maybe don't know about this, what conspiracy theories have actually done in terms of the harms that they've done, which we've been talking about, and which have been very considerable. And I think that's a huge part of what I mean by outing. I mean, the other thing that I mean by outing is this. So one of the conspiracy theorists' favorite question is who benefits. Right, so they say things like, well, who really benefited from 9/11? Well, the American government, because it gave them an excuse to invade Iraq, and so on and so forth. So I want to say, okay, well, that's fair enough. You can ask that question. Okay, but I have the right to ask the same question about conspiracy theories and conspiracy theorists. Who benefits from them? Right? What do the people who put those theories forward? What's in it for them? And that's a question you really need to ask. Now, some people say to me, oh, well, that only proves that you're a conspiracy theorist yourself. You're just a conspiracy theorist about conspiracy theories, right? Well, I mean, if I am, that's fine by me. But I mean, actually, I don't think I am. I mean, I'm just saying that when anybody is trying to sell you something, right, including a conspiracy theory, it's actually not a bad question to ask, what is their agenda? What is their agenda? And in the case of many of these theories, it's not that difficult to figure out what the political agenda is. That's what's in it for them. That's why that's why these, so what I call producers of conspiracy theories, that's why they're in business. I mean, there's money to be made. I mean, if you think about, someone like David Icke,
the man with the lizards with money involved.
Yeah. So pre-coronavirus, I mean, big speaking engagements. I presume, people pay good money to go and listen to him. People pay money to subscribe to his website. So, there's a business angle. There's a business angle to this, and that's some. So there's the politics of conspiracy theories, and there's the business of conspiracy theories, and these are all things that people should look at. So if you want to be skeptical, if some people say, well, I'm just being skeptical, and so I want to say, okay, you can be skeptical, you can raise questions about the government and the establishment and so on, but don't forget to be skeptical also about the conspiracy theories, and don't forget to be skeptical about them as well. If you're going to say I'm just not a trusting person, all right, well, why are you trusting these guys then? In that case, the conspiracy theory. So that's that's what I call the outing element. Ask the difficult questions of them as well.
And I would say, to be honest, trust the experts. Trust the experts. And can I just say this, Kazim? It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to an expert.
Well, thank you. It's been great fun talking to you, Ross. And on the trust the experts thing, look, if your car breaks down, what do you do? Well, if you are an expert in car maintenance, you fix it yourself. But if, like me, you know absolutely nothing about your cars and my car breaks down, well, I tend to call the AA or some other organizations are available, of course.
But the point is, what you don't do is you don't go and ask the rabbit at the side of the road to fix your car.
Yeah, and if I'm flying a plane, the passengers don't take a vote on who they think should be in the pilot seat, right? The person in the pilot seat is someone who's an expert, right? Who's gone through an incredibly intense period of training, and the last I heard, airline pilots have to be retested every 6 months, right? That's expertise. That's the kind of people. That's the kind of man or woman I want in the pilot seat of the plane I fly in, and that, I think, is something that people should just remember. It's a completely blindingly obvious point, but we should remember that the same principle applies to your car, to your plane, to your medical issues, to everything.
Thank you again.
It's been a pleasure, Ross. Thank you so much for having me on your program.